This husky wasn't thirsty at all, yet it monopolized the only water source. Whenever another dog dared to approach, it would fiercely drive them away. The other dogs were too afraid to fight back, so they just lowered their heads in silence. But the new dog was different. It walked over to the frozen lake and effortlessly chipped open a hole in the ice. Hearing the sound, all the dogs rushed over, and Buck welcomed everyone, generously sharing the water. But instead of reflecting on its actions, the husky named Spitz became even more aggressive. It thought that as long as it ran at the front of the team, the owner would keep favoring it, completely unaware that what truly matters in a lead dog is the loyalty of the other sled dogs. One day, their owner Françoise was scouting ahead when the ice suddenly cracked beneath her feet, plunging her straight into the freezing lake. Perrault rushed over immediately, but Françoise could no longer hold on, her body drifting deeper into the icy water. At that critical moment, Buck shot forward like lightning, leaping past Perrault and diving straight in without hesitation. In the dark, murky lake, Buck lifted Françoise onto his back and began slamming his body against the ice over and over again. Finally, Françoise was pulled to safety by Buck's relentless effort. But by then, Buck was completely exhausted. Soon, he couldn't hold on any longer and began drifting into the darkness himself. Perrault stood anxiously on the ice, calling out Buck's name again and again. Hearing Buck's faint response, Perrault quickly pinpointed the spot and began slamming his knife into the ice. But the ice was too thick. After just a few strikes, the knife snapped in two. Devastated, Perrault collapsed to his knees. He never imagined that the dog he once saw as a burden would risk its life to save his wife. At that moment, someone handed him a tool from the side. Without a second thought, Perrault grabbed it and began chiseling at the ice once again. But suddenly, he realized something. He turned his head and saw that the one who gave him the stick was Buck. Watching Buck nuzzle up to its owner, Spitz burned with jealousy. Even Françoise, who once disliked Buck, had come to trust him, and added an extra drumstick to his meal. This gesture took Buck back to memories from years ago. He used to be the most unruly dog in town, cocky and lawless, yet no one dared mess with him because his owner was a wealthy man named Judge Miller who doted on him. Though often helpless, Judge Miller could only sigh and drag Buck out of the house. Before the troublemaker could cause more chaos, Judge Miller shut the door behind him. But that never stopped Buck. He planned to sneak in through the window as usual. This time, though, Judge Miller caught him. It was Judge Miller's birthday, and he simply wanted Buck to behave for just one day. But before he could finish his sentence, Buck was already distracted by a wild rabbit, and his words were completely ignored. Around noon, Buck returned and immediately noticed the feast laid out on the table. More importantly, the seat was still empty. Licking his lips, he decided to give his owner a birthday surprise. Sometime later, he strolled in, wagging his tail, and sat beside Judge Miller. But when everyone saw the chicken leg in Buck's mouth, they knew something was wrong. Sure enough, the dining table was in ruins. Judge Miller looked utterly defeated, but at least Buck had left one chicken leg behind. And so, Buck was left outside overnight for the first time, never expecting that this would be a farewell forever. Late into the night, the gardener came and lured Buck with food. Thinking it was just a game, Buck hesitated only for a second before jumping into the truck. But the moment he turned his head, the cage slammed shut. No matter how he struggled, it wouldn't open. That's when Buck finally realized the gardener had sold him. As the castle faded into the distance, Buck was filled with regret. But it was too late. After being sold over and over again, Buck finally saw the light of day, only to be greeted by a world of ice and snow. He had arrived in the wild. As a dog from the south, Buck had never seen snow before, and his awkward first steps showed it. Everything around him was new and fascinating, until he was suddenly shoved into a cage and put on display for buyers. Luckily, Buck's strong physique caught the attention of a man, and just like that, Buck got his second owner, a husband and wife team of postal workers. At first, Françoise wasn't happy with Buck, because for the same price they could have gotten 2 proper sled dogs. Little did she know, Buck would end up saving them from danger many times over. But on his very first day, Buck didn't fit in with the rest of the dogs at all. He resisted the harness his owners put on him, and when he ran, he made a complete fool of himself, dragging the entire sled team into chaos. After some time and training, Buck finally began to integrate with the team. But just as things were getting better, he got distracted by a standing bunny, and without thinking, slid straight into a ditch. Of course, the entire sled team tumbled in right after him. The dogs were all furious, and Buck knew it was his fault, so he hung his head in shame. But instead of scolding him, Perot came over and encouraged Buck not to lose heart. Joining a team always takes time. And that was the first time Buck truly understood what it meant to be part of a team.
Come, we try again.
That night, the sled dogs camped in the freezing snow. Buck couldn't take the cold anymore, so he pushed Françoise out of the tent and climbed into Perot's arms for warmth. Scolded by Françoise, Buck sheepishly walked outside and tried to curl up in the snow like the other dogs. Luckily, the following days went a lot more smoothly. Even though Buck was constantly picked on by the lead dog Spitz, they managed to deliver most of the letters. But peace didn't last. Trouble brewed within the team again. Spitz often used his status as lead dog to steal food from the others, and no one dared to stop him. Buck couldn't stand it anymore. He walked over to a little yellow dog and gently pushed his own food toward him. The little dog stared in disbelief, and Buck nudged the food again before walking away without a word. That small act of kindness changed how the rest of the dogs saw Buck. So the next morning, when Spitz woke up, he realized the balance of power had shifted. That night, after Buck rescued a rabbit, Spitz attacked it and killed it in front of everyone, then stared at Buck with clear provocation. Spitz slowly approached Buck, ready to fight. Buck, raised in a mansion, had never seen anything like this and froze in fear. But to assert dominance, Spitz attacked. Even though Buck was twice his size, he had grown up spoiled and had lost his wild instincts. He was knocked down in just a few blows. Spitz then went on to mock the unconscious Buck with taunting movements. Then he turned to the rest of the team, trying to rally them back to his side. But none of the dogs wanted to follow Spitz anymore. They howled at Buck, urging him to get up. At that moment, Buck bared his teeth and rose to his feet, his primal instincts fully awakened. Spitz was stunned by Buck's fierce expression, but not wanting to lose face, he charged anyway. But this time, Buck stood firm. With perfect timing, he dodged to the side and bit down on Spitz's neck, slamming him to the ground. Finally, Buck stepped on Spitz and snarled, "Do you submit or not?" The dogs watching nearby couldn't hold back their cheers, and Spitz knew then he had lost. He got up and walked away in defeat, leaving behind only his lonely figure in the snow. The next morning, with no lead dog in the team, Buck naturally stepped forward, but Perot thought Buck lacked experience, so he dragged him back to the rear and brought in an older, seasoned dog to take the lead. However, the old sled dog took one look at Buck and flat out refused, rolling around in the snow like a stubborn little pup. Perot had no choice but to give in. Buck would lead the team this time. While adjusting the gear, Perot grumbled that they'd now be at least 2 days late. He didn't notice at all that the sled dogs had undergone a dramatic transformation. As soon as he gave the command, the sled team shot forward like an arrow. At this speed, not only would they not be late, they'd arrive way ahead of schedule. Perot felt like he was living his dream and cheered nonstop along the way. But his shouting triggered an avalanche, and he quickly ordered Buck to turn left. But the best way to conquer fear is to face it. Buck felt something calling to him from deep within, and without hesitation, he led the team straight into a cave up ahead. In the days that followed, they blazed through the wilderness and reached town 2 days earlier than expected, though their grand entrance wasn't exactly graceful.
We made it!
That night, off-duty Buck wandered the quiet streets. He saw the townsfolk holding letters, their faces lit with joy, and in that moment, Buck felt he had found his purpose. The next day, the sled team set off again, carrying a cart full of longing, cheered on by the crowd. But just as they were about to leave, an old man rushed up. He had come to send a letter filled with overwhelming longing. Buck took the letter from him, and from that moment on, the two were bonded forever. From that day on, the sled dog team became famous overnight, enjoying a brief period of glory. But the good times didn't last. Soon, with the advancement of technology, Perot's mail delivery service was replaced by the telegraph. Though he was deeply reluctant, he had no choice but to sell the dogs to make a living. And so, they ended up in the hands of a gold prospector named Hal. The dogs had already been starving for days, and with the wheels frozen in place, even their full strength wasn't enough to move the sled. But Hal didn't care. He raised a stick, ready to strike. That's when John showed up again. He helped loosen the sled and kindly warned them that setting off to mine gold during this season was a death sentence. But Hal wouldn't listen. His mind was consumed by the mythical river of gold.
Let's go.
And so, despite all warnings, they set out on their journey. The uphill terrain was brutal, and Hal kept shouting at the dogs to go faster. At one point, a dog collapsed from exhaustion, and the sled slid backward, nearly falling down the slope. Thankfully, Buck braced himself just in time and stopped the fall. But Hal thought the dogs were slacking and began whipping them without mercy. Hearing his companions being beaten behind him, Buck gritted his teeth and held on with everything he had. Time passed, and Buck was completely spent. Yet Hal showed no compassion. Seeing Buck as a burden, he didn't hesitate to pull out a pistol, ready to finish him off. Luckily, John had been keeping an eye on them and arrived just in time to save Buck. Enraged, he pushed Hal to the ground. In the end, John took Buck in, while the remaining dogs, still barely hanging on, were forced to keep working. Before parting, the dogs gazed deeply at Buck. They knew this might very well be the last time they ever saw him. A few days later, Buck finally woke up. Just as John feared, the ice river had completely melted. Buck's old teammates had likely perished, and all he could do was howl toward the sky, hoping they had somehow survived. But Buck wasn't the only one in pain. Inside the cabin, John sat quietly, staring at the photo in the frame as he drowned his sorrows in alcohol. Seeing him pour another glass, Buck knew it had to act. He deliberately knocked over the glass of liquor, and while John was busy cleaning it up, he seized the entire bottle and ran off with it.
Now what are you gonna do? Huh?
Outside, he buried the bottle deep in the snow. John followed him out and laughed, praising Buck. He thought the dog just wanted to chill the liquor. But when he reached for it, Buck refused to move, sitting upright in the snow like a righteous guard. John sighed and gave up. It turned out that today was his son's birthday. He had always told his son never to go exploring, but the boy's love for adventure cost him his life, leaving John to live on in sorrow. Buck listened quietly and lay beside him, promising with his presence that he would never leave him. The next morning, John sobered up, feeling a new energy. His son had once been obsessed with a legend. At the far end of the map, there was a river of gold, where gold covered the ground. Now that he had Buck, John decided to go on one last adventure, to fulfill his son's dream. And so, the man and the dog set out. They crossed rivers teeming with fish, birds guided them by day, and fireflies lit their path at night. As they ventured deeper into the wilderness, the presence of more and more animals signaled they had reached the map's edge, a place no human had ever set foot. It wasn't exactly the golden land of legend, but for John, it was perfect. A quiet place to escape the noise of civilization. He built a wooden cabin and decided to stay. But soon, he realized he had been wrong. One day, while bathing in the river, John pulled up a massive chunk of gold. The legend of the Golden River was real. Buck, excited, began digging too, tail wagging in the air. He brought back a huge rock, but John told him only the yellow ones were real gold. In Buck's world, there were only black and white, but in the next second, he fished out a chunk of gold the size of a fist. Seeing John ignore him, Buck thought it was just another worthless rock and tossed it back into the river. Not until he found one with the same size and shape did he stop. He proudly dropped it into John's bowl, eyes sparkling with anticipation, waiting for praise. Just then, Buck spotted a white figure in the distance. With John's permission, he curiously gave chase. But as soon as he caught up, his courage disappeared. Seeing the white she-wolf slowly approach, Buck grew nervous and started gulping frantically. He tried to mimic humans by offering a paw, hoping to shake hands. But how could the wolf understand such gestures? Their first encounter ended awkwardly and abruptly. But when Buck saw paw prints just like hers, he realized they were the same kind. Deeply drawn to the white wolf, Buck silently began following behind her. Even a fleeting glance from her was enough to make his heart race, while her eyes held nothing but disdain. Meanwhile, the wolf pack was hunting a wild boar, and the old alpha was ready to strike. But in a sudden misstep, the old wolf fell into a raging river. Before his pack could help, He was swept onto a fallen tree, right above a cliff, in deadly danger. Seeing the panic, Buck knew it was time to act. In a flash, he leapt forward like lightning, and using his powerful body, he lifted the entire tree trunk on his own. The old wolf was pulled to safety just in time. That day, Buck not only won the white wolf's respect, but earned the acceptance of the whole pack. From then on, Buck became one of them. They hunted together, thrived together. Buck would bring John wild pheasants and fat fish. Watching Buck so joyful among the wolves, John knew Buck had found where he truly belonged. But where was his own place in this world? In the end, John decided to return to the human world. That was where he truly belonged. Before leaving, he kept only the gold he needed to survive and threw the rest back into the river. When Buck learned John was leaving, his heart ached with sadness. But neither asked the other to stay. They both understood. Yet the night before John's departure, something unexpected happened. Hal showed up. He had found the map John had left behind. The two fought fiercely, but John was getting old. He was quickly shot in the stomach. John emptied all the gold from his pockets, hoping it would satisfy Hal, but it wasn't enough. Hal pointed a gun at him, demanding the location of the Golden River. At that moment, Buck arrived. He lunged at Hal, knocking the rifle from his hands, but as the stick swung toward him, Buck froze. Memories of past beatings haunted him. Still, when Hal struck again, Buck's wild instincts took over. He bit down on the stick. Then, with all his might, Buck drove Hal backward, straight into the flames. The cabin collapsed in the next second, and Hal was consumed by the fire. But John's injuries were too severe. Buck brought him his notebook. Inside was a photo of his son. He wanted John to hold on. But John was already nearing the end. His eyes held no fear, only sorrow that he had to leave Buck behind. And so, with Buck by his side, John leaned against his back just like old times, and slowly drifted into eternal sleep. Buck pressed his head tightly to John's face, giving him a final, silent farewell. He never imagined that the owner who had spent the least time with him would give him a whole new life. After John's passing, Buck no longer felt any attachment to the human world. Without hesitation, he walked into the wilderness, and in time, the mighty Buck became the king of the wolves.